Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in episode 21 of our Well Bible Reading Journey podcast. I'm glad that you're joining us. I'm glad that you're going on this journey with us. This week, we are in Exodus chapters 8, 9, and 10, Psalm chapter 20, and Matthew chapter 20. And as usual, there's a lot packed into these verses. Genesis and Exodus are so rich with stories. Every single story, it seems, is super important to the bigger story of the Bible. And of course, in Matthew chapter 20, we have Jesus teaching us. It's a great chapter. So we're going to get right into it. I'm going to ask Amber and Craig to join me. Amber and Craig, good to see you.
Hey, hey.
Yeah, Craig, welcome back.
Thank you.
I hope you had a good time last weekend with your wife and celebrating your anniversary. But we're glad that you're back.
Thanks for the time off.
Sure. No. So let's get right to it. We are emphasizing today Exodus chapter 10. And so we're still in the middle of the plagues, and these are really the last two before the final plague. And so there's a lot going on here. So let's just start with Craig. Why don't we start with you? What are some of the things that popped out at you from Exodus chapter 10?
Thanks, Ellis. I do want to look at 8 through 10, and
Sure.
I won't dissect particular verses in particular, but I do want to focus on a theme around the hardening of Pharaoh's heart and look at what does this mean to us. A lot of people, including me, have struggled with this for years. Why does God make Pharaoh go through this if he's just going to, in the end, make Pharaoh bear the consequences? And not only Pharaoh, but the entire people of Egypt. So what is going on here? So let me walk us through a little bit, at least what I found, and this isn't the only interpretation, I'm sure, but it really helped me. So all through these chapters, these early chapters of Egypt, we've seen this tug of war between God and Pharaoh. We hear of God hardening Pharaoh's heart, or we hear Pharaoh hardening his own heart. So like I asked before, what is going on? Pharaoh says in Exodus 5, verse 9, "Let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words." And this phrase is important because there's a hidden Hebrew phrase in here. I won't try to pronounce it, but basically the sense of heavier work is a masterful suggestion of God's future plan. We have this word in there, tikbad, which is from the root word kavod, which is heavy or hard, which we'll see play out in the sense of hardening Pharaoh's heart later on. Coveting or kavod Pharaoh's heart. It's almost this sense of to make heavy, which is translated, it's in the translation. There's also the sense of to be stupid, or as we would say, to do stupid. It's almost like blinders are on and Pharaoh's heart either God didn't want Pharaoh to see what was going on, or Pharaoh himself didn't want to see what was going on.
Yeah.
But there's also this sense in that phrase of ha-avodah, I think I'm getting that right, but that's what the Hebrew word used in that previous Exodus 5 chapter about Israel's service, from the root word avad, which refers not only to work, but also to some form of service or worship that Israel will give to the Lord in Exodus chapter 12, which we'll see next week. So this tug of war is about Israel, who will they avad, or who will they serve and worship? Will it be Pharaoh, or will it be Yahweh? As it's also, so this story is also not only about control, but it's about who's sovereign for Israel, Pharaoh or Yahweh. And Pharaoh, as y'all said last week in the podcast with Bobby, was seen as a high priest or as a divine figure himself in the Egyptian pantheon. So he is looking to maintain control and maintain his sovereignty over his realm. For the Egyptians, Pharaoh helped to maintain order and the rhythms of life. So we see him trying to do that and in a sense, save face or save his place and his role in the universe that he sees it. So the conversation in these early chapters of Exodus, as we have as we have seen about Pharaoh's hardened heart, it really is quite the conundrum. Sometimes God, as we have seen, hardens Pharaoh's heart, and sometimes Pharaoh's hardening his own heart. There's two words at play here for harden. I touched on kavod, to be hard or to be stupid. There's also this sense of chazak, which means to strengthen. And after the livestock plague in chapter 9, it's Pharaoh that strengthened his heart himself. He seems to have realized what's happening here. He's acknowledged his sin, and the story changes at that point. He's not letting Israel go yet, but he's seeing what's going on. He's just not acknowledging Pharaoh, or he's not acknowledging Yahweh and Yahweh's sovereignty over him. And so the story is about who Israel will serve, who is sovereign, and about the sense of God is offering to Pharaoh the sense that I am this God who I've just revealed to Moses as I am who I am. I've invited Moses to respond with Yahweh. He will be who he will be. But it's this God who's pursuing Pharaoh and trying to dismantle his own worldview plague by plague so that Pharaoh too can turn. But in the end, we know that Pharaoh doesn't, and God lets him deal with the full consequences of his recalcitrance.
Yeah, no, and I think it's just this story. It seems to be this battle between Moses and Pharaoh. But to your point, Craig, with the hardening of the heart, as it turns out, the story is really not a story of Moses and Pharaoh at all. It really is the story of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh, versus the gods of Egypt, who certainly are represented by Pharaoh, even as Yahweh is represented by Moses. So Moses and Pharaoh become the representatives of these dueling or competing worldviews, monotheism versus polytheism, Yahweh versus the gods of Egypt. And you see it with the plagues, where we mentioned before, the plagues are attacking really the Egyptian gods. So the plague of darkness, which is in this chapter, right, is an affront to the god, the main god, the main god of Egypt was Re, the sun god, right? And if you've ever been in that part of the world, you can understand how they maybe worship the sun, because the sun is ever present and it's blistering and all that. But here God is over the Ray God, because he brings darkness. He does away with the sun. He just does away with it, right? And so it's all this darkness. So it's just this battle between them, and Pharaoh's heart being hardened. It even shows that God is even pulling the strings with Pharaoh. Pharaoh only thinks he's in charge. He's not in charge. So it really is, to your point, Craig, right on target. It is a word about the sovereignty of God. Now I know that, Amber, you kind of dug deep into some of the parallels going on here. There's a lot of imagery being used that harkens back to the creation and other things. So share with us some of your insights from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I, as I was reading through there, I started highlighting just things that I've seen before. Like, oh, I've seen this word before, and so I started highlighting, and all of a sudden, it came up with this beautiful picture. The plagues are actually, if you take the 10th plague and it's set apart, and it's set apart not just for my this graph that I'm going to share with you, but also set apart because the first 9 plagues, 1 through 9, take 4 chapters to explain. The 10th plague is 3 chapters all by itself. So it
Yeah.
is just completely set apart on its own for many reasons.
Yes.
But if you just take the first 9 plagues, it actually creates three triads, 3 sets of 3. If you remember in the creation story, the 7th day being set apart, once again, it is 2 sets of triads, it's 2 sets of 3. And within those triads, there are things that connect it horizontally as well as vertically. And that's what you see here with the plagues as well. So I had this really fun opportunity this week to kind of make this graph of where things connected horizontally and vertically. And maybe I'll share that with our Facebook group, maybe write that out for them so you can
Yeah.
see it, because I could not even get close to trying to describe it on this podcast today. But some of the interesting things just right off the bat is that the first set of triads, so the numbers 1, 4, and 7. So the first of the 3 triads, the beginning of a new set of 3, if you will. The 1, 4, and 7 all say it happens in the morning, and they were to go out and meet Pharaoh at the water, or at the river, or the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
So it is in the morning, and they're meeting Pharaoh out at the Nile.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see that both in 1, 4, and 7. That's an example. You will also see in 1, 2, and 3, moving horizontally, it will say all have to do with the Nile. They all represent near the Nile. They represent. Also, in 2, 5, and 8, the second set of triads, it will say that they met in Pharaoh's house. Very specifically, all 3 say that. In all 3 of the last, do not give a warning. They don't meet Pharaoh at the river, the Nile, and they don't meet him in his home. The plagues just happen. There's no warning in the last 3. So those are just a couple. I mean, I have many, many more examples, but that's just a really interesting thing as you go through all these readings this week to try to pick up on some of these things that stand out. Oh, I've seen this before, and how they all connect.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's excellent. These are literary devices that were used by the biblical writers. Part of it was this ability, because you have to remember that all these stories were transmitted orally before they were ever written down. And it was a device that helped them to remember the order, to remember how they're connected. But no, that's good work, Amber. They do connect in some very specific ways, and how you see each of the triads starting with the same way, ending the same way, right? And so you can map all that out. That's awesome. You guys will be able to download that maybe a PDF we'll have in the description if you want to see the fruit of Amber's work on that. It's really beautiful. Yeah. So what else? What else do we get from this scene? We have the locust, we have the darkness, and we have this battle going on. It's interesting how this negotiation, where Pharaoh keeps wanting to negotiate. Well, if you're going to go out and worship, who all's going? Moses says, well, we all have to go. Our livestock. Everybody's going, no, 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 no. Just let the men go, right? And then when Moses says no, Moses is unrelenting. It has to be. We have to go worship him with everything we have.
Yeah.
That's when Pharaoh says, no, I can't let you go, right? So you have
That's
this
right.
back and forth going between them there.
I wanted to go on what Craig was saying about the hardened heart. And then at some point, Craig, you
Mhm,
mentioned that at one point, he actually says it twice. He actually admits and he says, I have sinned.
mhm,
Your God is right and I am wrong. I am the wicked one here. He is good. I am bad. He actually admits to his sin a couple times in chapter 9 and chapter 10 during the locust part. Um, I actually get this really wonderful opportunity when I study at the coffee shops. People that see me often or ask, what do you talk about this week? What's your podcast about this week? Because I'm a talker. Y'all might know
mhm,
that about me.
yeah.
I talk to everybody. I'm lucky to get anything accomplished. But I just said, hey, I'm talking about this. I'm right now focusing on why Pharaoh would admit his sin here. And this person, I can't take credit for it. This person said this really interesting phrase that got me to really dig in here. He said, isn't it interesting that Pharaoh became more aware of his sin? When you're close to God, even the most hardened will recognize their sin. And I
Hmm.
was like, that is a fascinating point because he's right. I agree with this person. Our closeness alone, our nearness to God alone, will undoubtedly require some sort of recognition of our sinfulness, won't it? And that's exactly what Pharaoh was experiencing. Pharaoh at this point was experiencing Yahweh's power and presence on a regular basis.
Mhm.
And that in itself will help make you recognize your sinfulness. I agree. What I started digging on, what I started processing was, what does that mean? Did that mean Pharaoh was in some sort of like repentance here? And so I started digging with this thought. And I wanted to say that although recognition alone does not actually equal reconciliation. I think that's really important. I think throughout scripture, that's pretty clear. I think here it's pretty clear that Pharaoh was experiencing the first steps towards repentance, possibly. But he didn't do the hardest part. The hardest part isn't the recognition. The hardest part is the change of the heart.
Yeah.
And we see here specifically Yahweh hardens, but at the end of the day, the point is his heart was not changed. There is a big difference between repentance and recognition, between regret and remorse. Those are two different things here. Just a quick analogy. I've heard this once before, and I think it's helpful here in this scenario. If you think of your faithfulness to God as a train, and some trains are really long, right? The very last one being the caboose. The caboose is your heart. So have that image in your head, a really long train and the caboose is your heart. And you can recognize that you're on the wrong path. I've done this before where I'm
Mhm.
like, oh man, I am not on and I make an intentional effort to recognize that I am sinning and I'm on the wrong path. And I make a change of direction. And that alone is hard. Start making a change with my obedience, with my decision making, with my attitude, with my closeness to God. I start making a shift. The problem is that caboose, if you think of a long train, it takes a long time for that heart to get to that turn. And
Mhm.
what I think happens here with Pharaoh is before he had a chance for that caboose to get to the change, his heart was hardened. He goes back onto the wrong path. And I think that's what we see over and over again. Just a little
Yeah.
analogy to help with the difference between recognition and actual repentance.
No,
I think
that's
that's
good.
really-
That's good. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, just real quick, I think that's really helpful analogy, Amber, and I really love that. I also think it's easy for us to laugh at Pharaoh and shake our own head, kind of in judgment. You know, if I was in that situation, of course I would recognize the wrong path I was on and after 10 plagues. But would we? Do we bow our knee and let God take control of our realities through all the plagues and hardships attacking us and hitting us? Or are we coveting? Are we hardening our own hearts and refusing to abad, to serve him and worship him? We must relinquish control of the empires that we have built in our own lives and hand them over to the creator of the universe, who is the true sovereign.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. And you have to recognize too that Pharaoh's worldview, this is all he had ever known was his worldview.
Right.
And God is asking him to completely reevaluate his own worldview. And that is super, super hard to do. And there is this long distance between recognizing something and then acting on it. And you know, the New Testament scriptures, even James tells us, well, the demons recognized that Jesus was who he was, but it didn't change them, right? It didn't change anything. They were scared and they ran away, but they didn't run to him. It's a difference between recognizing who Jesus is. Satan knew who he was, but it didn't change anything. So that's an excellent point.
Alice,
So much going on here. Yeah.
You talked about did Pharaoh recognize what was going on, and God was trying to break that down. And I think, Amber, you made the comment in our pre-meeting before this podcast that this is a story of decreation, and there's this sense of deconstruction going on.
Right.
We have the creation analogies that you alluded to. I love the thought that this is a decreation and he's deconstructing Pharaoh's worldview. That's a great interconnection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really is a lot going on here. Even this point where the magicians try to replicate one of the plagues with the gnats, and they can't do it. And even his magicians say, "Look, we're up against a god here. We're up against a god here that we can't compete with." So they're starting to recognize this, but it's still hard to let go, right? You're still hoping against hope that it won't happen. Well, great. Awesome. So let's move then to Matthew chapter 20, because there's so much in there as well. We've got the parable of the vineyard workers. We've got Jesus predicting his death again. We've got this scene where James and John are coming and they want to be on his right hand and his left hand, greatest, least. That greatest, least seems to be a theme running through here. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's start with the parable. So Amber, why don't we start with you? What did you come up with this parable?
Yes, sir. I when I saw this parable, I read it through one time and I was like, man, how many times have I heard this or heard this sermon or thought about this passage? And so I prayed about it and I asked the Lord to kind of maybe give me something new and fresh from it. And I hope that can happen for you this week, listeners. But here's a couple things that came out from my study of this passage. Is the story with the laborers and the parable of the vineyard worker or the landowner. I think that one of the things that stood out the most to me is recognizing that the landowner had to invite them to be hired first. I think too often we skip that part. It's really important to notice that the laborers didn't go on their own accord, that the landowner had to send them to the vineyard first. And it's because they were sent that's when they got the equal portion, the same portion. And so yeah, that's my first thought if you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's absolutely true. We don't really focus oftentimes on the sending part of it, that it's almost like this sending. God is a sending God. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Craig, what did you get from the parable?
So I really wanted to start with Matthew 19. And since we didn't cover this last week, y'all didn't cover this last week, there's a little bit of, I don't feel too bad about going backwards a little bit.
No,
We'll cover the whole chapter, just the rich young man from.
Yeah, they all connect. They all connect.
They do. And we really see the parable of the vineyards is rooted in what happens before. Mm-hmm. So when Jesus commands the rich young man to sell his possessions to the poor and to follow him, that's what Jesus says the rich young man must do and answer the question, what must I do to be perfect? The rich young man hears this and leaves. He's just disheartened, and he's obviously too attached to his possessions to do that. So he goes away dejected, and he's in a sense failed to honor both his relationship to God and his relationship to his neighbors, because he's so tied and his sense of self-worth is tied up into who he or what he has, not just in who he is or who God is. So here again, we see questions of control. Who will we serve, Ovid, and what's the state of our own heart, Kavod or Chazak? And do we acknowledge the state of things and our own place in it? So to be saved, to be made a member of the church through baptism, means that we are no longer our own. We are no longer in control of our own lives. We've been given over to something bigger, both to God and to our neighbors. So when the disciples question this, they say it's impossible. If it's impossible for this rich young man who's in that society and in our own, is the worldly view, the human view of what it means to be successful, to be on top, that's turned on its head by Jesus. The disciples see that as impossible, but God, Jesus says, with God, all things are possible. And then he says, many who are first shall be last, and the last first. And so Israel is often compared to God's vineyard in the Old Testament, for example, in Isaiah 5, verses 1 through 2. So it's not a stretch here at all for Jesus to use the parable of the vineyard to paint this picture for the disciples who are steeped in the Hebrew scriptures. And we see here that the parable of the vineyards is not only about God's grace and the impartiality of it, but to me, it's more about the sheer abundance of it. We have we have a God here who is in control, and he's using what is his, what is rightfully his, to extend to not only the people who come in first, but those who are waiting to be let in also faithfully, and who don't come in at the day, but they still come in at the end or in the middle, and they get the same thing that the people who came in at first. And it's just funny to me that the people who came in first and it's honestly a pleasure to be working. If you've ever been without a job, you know how anxious that could be. You wonder about the future. You wonder about where's my, maybe tomorrow we have enough saved up to pay for the next 6 months of meal, but what about month seven?
Yeah.
And the hard job market, you can be in this position very easily. But so those people who are there first kind of get comfortable with where they're at and take for granted or forget that they too were without a job until they were hired. And they're making fun of these Joes who came in at the last hour or the middle of the day and like, oh, look at those lazy bums. Why are they getting what I got?
Yeah.
But it's all by grace that we're here, getting what we can to feed our family and to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's good insight, Craig. It's interesting that I love the response of the farmer, who obviously the farm owner, for whatever you want to call him, the one who owns the place, who basically says at the end, he says, "Look, it's my farm, it's my vineyard.
Right.
Why are you telling me how to run my vineyard? I'll run it.
Mhm.
I'll run my vineyard the way I want to run my vineyard. If you want to run a vineyard, go find your own vineyard. This is my vineyard. I pay what I want to pay, right? So it's like, why are
Right.
you questioning this? Did we not have an agreement that you would make this much? Yes.
Right.
And did I give you this much? Yes. So why are you complaining? It's kind
Right.
of this jealousy thing. It's like they're jealous of the ones who only worked for a little while and got the same amount. And so it's kind of this jealousy thing going on.
You're right. I think that's really interesting, the jealousy part, Ellis, because I think that is super true today, where it's really hard for us to look at other people and just be happy for what they have instead of always trying to compare it to ourselves. Why do we have the instinct to do that, where we could look at someone and their success and what they're doing and their vacation and their whatever it is, XYZ, they have children or they have this many grandchildren or they're able to have this job, whatever it is, we look at them and think, I don't have that. Instead of looking at people and be like, I'm so glad they have something, that they
Yeah.
are being blessed. Why we do
Yes.
that, don't we?
Oh my goodness. And it's been magnified with social media,
Yeah.
because you have all this Facebook envy and Instagram envy or whatever, and all these influencers taking beautiful vacations, and people will they'll get jealous, they'll get bitter, they get depressed. There's a whole rise in depression.
Mhm.
I heard somewhere that the rise in particular teenage girls in depression and suicide has gone through the roof since social media has come in, because you look at all these other lives and think that yours is horrible compared to theirs. I don't know. I get on, I see someone on a vacation, I'm like, hey, I'm happy for them. That's
Right?
exciting. And
Mhm.
plus, I don't have to pay for the vacation. I'll just live vicariously through them, right?
Right?
I'll go to Greece through their pictures and enjoy it as much. Yeah, but it is hard, and this is a real thing, right? Where
Mhm.
people are jealous. A lot of times, this particular parable The thing that is emphasized, and it's not that it's wrong, it's one perspective, it's God's grace, of course, and certainly God is a God of grace. But I like what Justo Gonzalez does with this particular parable. He's in his book, Santa Biblia, the Bible through Hispanic eyes. He takes this and really looks at it through the eyes of a real itinerant farm worker, because Justo knows that life. And if you've ever had to do that, most of us have not. I never have. My grandfather did. But when you're an itinerant farm worker and you work the fields, and so you go down, you don't have a job. To Craig's point, it's hard not having a job. But these guys live day to day, so they go down to the town square. It still happens today. If you've ever been to town square down in Garland, there's this particular place where guys gather, and the guys who need work, the construction guys, know they can go there and maybe find some workers for the day. So it still happens where they would go down to town square and wait there for the patron to come in his truck and pick. He would pick, I need 5 workers, and they were all like raising their, pick me, pick me, pick me. He picks 5. They go. The rest of the guys stand there. They don't have a job. They don't have work. If someone doesn't pick them, their family's not going to eat tomorrow. And what they would pay at the end of the day was a denarii. It was basically the equivalent of 1 day's worth of food for a family, right? 1 day's worth of living, right? So that's what they're getting paid. They've got to work or they're not going to eat. It's depressing. It's hard. It's debilitating. But they stay there. They stay at the town square in the heat, waiting for work. And the heat patron comes back halfway through the day, says, need 5, 10 more. So he pick me, picks more. They get in the truck, they go, they're working. And the poor guys who didn't get picked are still standing there. Patron comes back at the end of the day with his truck, says, I've got 1 more hour. I need 5 more guys. But the first thing he says, he looks at them, right? And he asks the question, why are you guys still standing here, right?
Right.
He's shocked. Y'all are still here? Why are you still here? Doing nothing, right? You're not working. The guys, their answer is what? Well, no one will give us work. We want work. We've been standing here in the hot day all day waiting for work. Mm-hmm. And the patron actually says, you know what? At the end of this parable, I'm going to pay y'all. You were working all day, standing here in the heat, waiting at my beck and call. If you had not been here at the very end of the day, I wouldn't have been able to finish. You've been here all day waiting faithfully for me, right? This is a lesson to all of us. This is a lesson about faithfulness of the disciple, waiting for God to send me, right? Half the time we get ahead of God. We want to go work. No. God's not sending you or calling you yet. Just wait for him. But the waiting is hard work. In some ways, the waiting is just as hard as the doing, right? When you don't have a job, the waiting is miserable, right? And so I think at the end of the day, this is a parable about God's justice. That the farm worker, the farm owner was right. The vineyard owner was right in paying them the same, because they did all work all day. They just weren't actually in the field, right? They were waiting just in case he needed them. And he said, and when I needed you, you were there. I'm going to pay you for the whole day. Oh. And it's only from the perspective of the other guys who are jealous that it's not fair. Go ahead, Amber. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Ellis, I was just going to say that story really shines with something I was questioning and wrestling through this week. So thank you for sharing that, because it's a really great perspective. I actually wrote down, I tend to, my ears perk up like a little puppy dog every time there's a question asked. Mm-hmm. And right in the middle, you already said it, Ellis, right in the middle, my translation says it differently, but why are you standing here all day? My translation says, why are you standing here idling all day? Mm-hmm. My impression when I read that was like, wow, the landowner is a little annoyed that why are you just idling here? There is plenty of work to be done. There's so much work to be done. And then it made me think, if there's that much work to be done, why do we remain idled towards God or his kingdom plan? What you were just saying, that faithfulness to wait to be called. And so I asked myself some questions, and at first I felt awkward about them, but I think you helped me strengthen them. I was asking the questions because I know I've already been hired. So the story is 2 different sets of people who have not been hired yet, and those who have been hired. I looked at it as someone who I know I've been hired. God has called me to his vineyard. Praise Jesus that he has. And so with that in mind, I was thinking, okay, am I idling towards God? There's plenty of work to be done. He chose me in his human race to be co-creators. He asked us to sow the ground, to multiply, to send blessing. That's what I'm called to do. So am I idling here? Why am I idling if I am? What part of the vineyard has he hired me for? Pay attention. What part of the vineyard am I hired for? there's plenty of work to be done. But what's my reward? I asked that question. What is my reward? And then I thought, well, am I working for an earthly reward, or do I really understand this kingdom reward that we've been talking and wrestling through with Matthew and Jesus this whole time? Jesus keeps talking about this heavenly reward. And so I was reminded, this is about that heavenly reward. It's not just about our earthly reward.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. It's almost like in your scenario, what you're talking about, it's almost like if the guy had come, the vineyard owner had come with his truck and said, "I need 5 guys, you," and he picks you, and you go, "No, I'm not going to go." Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I mean, you're not going to eat, right? He's called you. Why aren't you're jumping in the truck? No, you don't say no to the vineyard owner when he says, "I have work for you." You get in the truck and you go. So to your point, I think, Amber, the question is, why aren't you getting in the truck? If you've been called to serve, get in the truck and start serving, right? That's awesome. And it really plays with the rest of the chapter, where he again predicts his death, saying it's going to be hard. This is going to happen to me. He's talking about his kingdom, and the mother of James and John comes, right, to ask the request of who will be the greatest. And you just kind of, like, at this point, you're kind of rolling your eyes going, really? I mean, really, have you not gotten this yet, right? He keeps talking about it, and what, it's something about it that they're just not getting. So human nature, maybe, or I don't know. So what did you guys pull from that last scene? Either one of you guys, Amber, Craig, what is it that you kind of pulled from that last scene with the mother's request, wanting to James and John to have these positions of power?
I think it comes down to the theme we've all been seeing play throughout all these chapters today. Who's in control? Where is power coming from? And who are we serving? James and John come in thinking that they have this preconceived notion that most Israelites had back in those days of what the Messiah would be. The Messiah would be a political figure, lead a military revolution against Rome, and overthrow the evil political power of the day in the sense of Rome, the oppressor. But again, we see Jesus turning things on his head. He's turning the world upside down. Last will be first, the first will be last. And to have power in the kingdom of God is a picture of service. It's a life of service. It's washing the feet. It's serving the others through sacrifice. It's supporting the Lord in the gospel. So the sense that they want to sit at his right and left hand in power, yes, in a sense, all the disciples become apostles and sit on the 12 thrones of Israel in the picture of heaven in Revelation, but that's a totally different picture than what they think it means. So they have to drink the cup of Jesus and be baptized with his baptism. They don't know what that means yet, but they will. And we don't know what it means for us necessarily yet, but we will as we go through the journey with Jesus.
Yeah. And he basically tells them, you don't know what you're asking for. Sometimes we have to be careful what we ask for. We ask for these things in prayer, and then God actually gives them to us. And it's like, oh my, I wish I hadn't asked for that, right?
And I put a sock in my mouth.
Dangerous God.
Yeah. Amber, is that some of the stuff you got from this one?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I thought of was, well, as a mom, I was like, well, yeah, I want my kid. Okay, we know that she is present a lot, and she's one of the many followers, not just the 12, but she's one of the many followers that follow around, because we see her later in Matthew as one of the ones that are mentioned to go to the body. So she's very familiar with Jesus. She's very familiar with the 12 disciples have gone through, what they've been doing. She's been traveling with Jesus. She's on this road trip to Jerusalem with them. And she sees the hard work that her sons are putting in.
Yeah.
And so she's just saying, hey, I see my kids and they deserve a lot here. And so I just see her as like just a mom who was just trying to make the best for her boys. And to her, it's such an earthly way of asking, isn't it? Just an earthly way of saying, hey, yeah.
Well, there are some scholars who piece this together with the relationships, and that she may have been actually Jesus's aunt. She may have been related to Jesus's mom, that Jesus was cousins with James and John, and so there were some relationships there. So she was kind of coming to someone she felt obviously comfortable enough to Jesus to come ask. Yeah, typical like Jewish mom. My son, the doctor. He's
Right.
a doctor, lawyer. I want him to be the best. So
Hmm.
there is a lot of that going in there. And it's interesting that the disciples then got angry when they heard about it. They're all mad. So you question, are they mad because they didn't think of doing it first? Because they all want to be in that position, right? And so Jesus gives them this lesson. Once again, he's turning everything upside down. He does it with the parable, first and last. He's turning everything upside down. This is what Jesus does with our preconceived notions, our perceptions. And I just want to encourage you this week. We're going to finish up here. We've only got a few minutes left, but I want to encourage you this week as you go through these scriptures to see yourself in these stories, to not be so quick as we've already mentioned to judge. We judged Pharaoh and we judge the James and John here. We judge the ones who were angry in the parable, but put yourself in their shoes and really see the scripture for what it's trying to say to you this week. So many good things we've already brought out. I know God's going to give you more great things and he's going to speak to you. I'm so excited for what he's going to teach you this week. And I pray that God blesses you as you continue on this journey with us through the Bible. God bless you and have a great week. We'll see you.